One of the main rules in psychology is as follows: it is not important what is happening to you, but how you react to this. And the Kremlin knows how to twist any events so that it is beneficial for Moscow and Putin. Hello, this is Pavel Stelmach speaking from Ukraine, UATV English studio in a weekly attempt to bring the hardest truths in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. All Russian mass media all weekend talk about the shooting and fire in Krasnogorsk near Moscow. Well, it is near Moscow. Moscow is 150 meters away. Therefore, we can say with complete confidence that everything happened in the capital of Russia. There were shots and there was a fire in the building. This is where the reliable information ends, because the information just announced can be easily verified according to hundreds of videos on the internet, which are very difficult to fake. But everything that happened after these events is no longer facts. It is the interpretation of the events by the Russian special services, propagandists, Kremlin curators, etc. Any information about the number of victims can be fabricated, because it is already known about cases when a person was included in the list of the dead but turned out to be alive. The number of injured is also a very relative figure, because during any fire with a large number of people there are many injured. Remember the terrorist attack in Paris in 2015, when more than 90 people died and more than 200 were injured due to the shooting. And there was only shooting without fire. Therefore, the Kremlin can also greatly increase the number of injured to get more compassion. As for the attackers, this is a separate story altogether. After all, according to the official version of the FSB, they were able to travel more than 400 kilometers from Moscow before they were detained. They traveled through the Moscow region and all of Kaluga region. According to the legend, they were led by special services and detained only when it became safe for other civilians in the forest. The fact that those people could stop at any moment, change cars or made another attack didn't bother anyone. And in general, have you ever seen Russia? Yes, there are continuous forests. You simply leave the urban and move to either a forest or a swamp. It is also interesting that none of the special forces was injured during the detention. The next interesting piece of information is who the detained persons were. According to the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, all of them are not citizens of Russia. Yes, we could believe it. After all, the first photographs of the attackers stated that they were citizens of Tajikistan. However, it later turned out that 3 of the 5 suspicious personae are now in the homeland and another officially working in 1,000 kilometers from the place of events. That's why some other Tajiks were detained. What's the difference, right? If you haven't seen it, there is even a video of the interrogation of the detainees. They do not speak Russian, they use a translator, but they said in one voice that they were allegedly recruited by the Ukrainian special services. How is it possible? It is unknown. But who cares if Putin himself said that the attackers wanted to leave to Ukraine? Perhaps something is wrong here. First, Putin spent 20 hours preparing to release a 5-minute video. Waited how it would be more profitable for the Kremlin to sell this story. I will talk about this a little later. So the attackers were supposed to go to Ukraine, but according to the statement of the ambassador of Belarus in Moscow, Dmitry Krutoy, the main task last night was to prevent the attackers from going across the Russian-Belarusian border. So where did their men go? By the way, in order for Putin's version to be more truthful, the place of detention was moved 150 kilometers away. Otherwise, it was something very close to Belarus. I almost forgot that ISIS officially claimed responsibility for this attack. But there is no difference for the Kremlin if it is not beneficial to their theory. And Western special services warned their citizens and the Russian authorities that terrorist attacks were being prepared in Russia. But no one did anything to prevent them. No, they did. The metal detectors in the concert hall were either removed or turned off. The Russian special services themselves admit that people were not checked at the entrance, really. If someone is killed, on the contrary, you can blame Ukraine or even the entire West, because it was their special services, not the FSB, that warned of a terrorist attack. So they were preparing. That's the logic. Let's go back to the fact that Putin spent 20 hours deciding who to blame for the attack. Now, according to the Moscow region, Ukrainians did everything by recruiting radical Islamists in Tajikistan and attacked Russian people. just the sake of it, although in fact the Kremlin had opinions to blame the terrorist attack on ISIS, which admitted that they are the organizers, and to start a joint international fight against terrorism, or blame Ukraine at the same time. The first option is the gift for Putin because it is possible to make contacts with world leaders and get the agreement on possible freezing the war in Ukraine. After all, most of the world leaders expressed their regret for the dead and would be happy to help the Kremlin fight against world evil. Of course, Putin said the ritual phase in the address about the joint fight against terrorists, but the main message is to unite against the enemy in order to punish them. And there is only one candidate for the role of the main enemy, the USA, because the US warned of a terrorist attack. The US talked about ISIS, the US denied the involvement of Ukraine, and this means that Russia must take extraordinary efforts to fight against the United States. And it also means a new wave of mass mobilization in Russia, the hunt for potential terrorists from among migrants and all those who disagree, the cleansing of security forces and officials who allegedly do not cope, and even the possible return of the death penalty at the request of the people. And what about the Russian people? And the Russian people will certainly do what the leader, president, Tsar, or whatever they call their ruler, will say. The public execution of people in Moscow should be understood as Putin's threat of an even greater escalation and expansion of the war. And Peskov's statement about the war shortly before the terrorist attack was just a false start of a carefully planned Kremlin special operation. The unhindered movement of a group of militants with assault rifles through the center of Moscow, as well as a lot of other indisputable evidence, indicate that the shooting at Crocus City Hall was probably organized by Russian special services. It is obvious to the world that the terrorist attack in Moscow is another crime committed by Putin to maintain his own power. When Putin came to power in the late 90s in Moscow, there were explosions on the Kashirsky highway, and then the shooting of hostages in Beslan and at the Nordost performance. These events made it possible to announce a new wave of mobilization and start the Second Chechen War. Now, 20 years later, the methods of the Russian special services have not changed. Terror, intimidation of the civilian population, and increased control inside the country. Therefore, we should now expect new steps and statements from the Kremlin. And if they cannot be fulfilled, then wait for new terrorist attacks. And while the FSB is catching the attackers in the Bryansk region, fighting has been going on for a week and a half into other border regions with Ukraine. By the way, the story of the terrorist attack greatly displaced the story of Belgorod and Tyotkina. However, if opponents of Putin regime hold out for a few more days, then we can definitely say that part of the Russian Federation has escaped the control of the central government. And for Moscow, this is critical. After all, it is not Ukraine that is fighting, not some mythical West and the Russians, who are against Putin regime. In general, the situation in the Ukrainian border area shows that the Kremlin system can be fought quite successfully. Moreover, they have already announced the evacuation of the civilian population from the Belgorod region. This means that we can expect airstrikes and cities to be destroyed, as was the case with Mariupol, Bakhmut, or Avdiivka. In fact, the situation is critical for the Kremlin even despite the fact that Russian state media ignore the Belgorod problem. Nobody says anything about this city because it is not profitable. But they talked about the fact that Donbass was bombed for 8 years because it was profitable, even though no one bombed it anyone except for the Russians themselves. That's why the Kremlin is now doing everything to end the fighting on its territory, because if this problem is not solved by April 1st, it could drag on so long and spread to other regions, and its solution will definitely be impossible. A few more days and certain people, including in the security forces in Russia, will understand that the force now is not the Russian Defense Minister Shoigu, but, for example, the commanders of the Russian Volunteer Corps, the commanders of the Ichkeria or the Siberian unit. Replenishment may begin on the spot, replenishment on the march on the territory of Russia. Let me remind you that the fighting has been going on since March the 12th, when Russian volunteers from the Freedom of Russia Legion announced that they were going to the elections for the president of the Russian Federation. We will take our land from the regime centimeter by centimeter. Russians will sleep peacefully. They will not be afraid to the doorbell. They will say what they think about without fear. Russians will vote for whom they want, not for whom they have to. The Russians will live freely, announced the Legion. The Ukrainian intelligence announced that the Freedom of Russia Legion, the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Siberian Battalion are conducting a joint operation on the territory of the Russian Federation without Ukrainian soldiers. But we generally support their actions. Poland and Germany will announce the creation of a coalition of armored vehicles for the needs of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. This was stated by Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of National Defense of Poland, Władysław Kośniak-Kamysz, during a meeting with Boris Pistorius on the website of the Polish government. The coalition of armored vehicles to support Ukraine is one of the most important coalitions, said Kośniak-Kamysz. He added that other partners such as Great Britain, Sweden, Italy have already joined this project. At the same time, Pistorius emphasized that this coalition is long-term character. According to him, the key is to increase the production of all kinds of defense products within the framework of Polish-German cooperation. The Polish and German ministers also announced the formation of rapid reaction forces in Europe, the first combat groups of the Polish and German armies in the amount of 2,500 military personnel will be ready for action by July this year. Also, this week, German Defense Minister Pistorius has announced a new military aid package worth about 500 million euros, which is aimed specifically at meeting the needs of the Ukrainian army in artillery ammunition. It was announced exactly after the 20th meeting in Ramstein. The priorities at this meeting for Ukraine was the provision of air defense systems and missiles for them, long-range missiles, artillery shells, especially 155mm caliber, modern systems of electronic warfare and electronic signals interference. Armored vehicles were also discussed.
Now, Ukraine's troops face harsh conditions and hard fighting, and Ukraine's civilians endure a constant barrage of Russian missiles and Iranian drones. But Ukraine won't back down, and neither will the United States. So our message today is clear. The United States will not let Ukraine fail. This coalition will not let Ukraine fail, and the free world will not let Ukraine fail.
During the 20th meeting, it became known that Finland will allocate 30 million euros to the Czech initiative for the purchase of ammunition. Canada pledged $40 million in military aid for the Czech initiative and $7.5 million for night vision equipment. Officially joined the drone coalition led by Latvia and the United Kingdom. Luxembourg joins the artillery coalition led by France, and the United States purchases drones for Ukraine in cooperation with Belgium and the Netherlands. Continues support to Ukraine by delivering much-needed equipment. So it's time for more on UATV English. You ask hard questions, we answer them in easy terms. The question of this week has been voiced by our viewer Neil Johnson 6815, and the question sounded like, does anyone actually think Putin will be able to attack anyone after Ukraine finishes kicking his butt? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. Putin may attack another country, in particular one of the Baltic states or Poland. After all, it is not for nothing that everyone always talks about the Suwałki corridor. Moreover, those countries are much smaller than Ukraine in terms of area, and it is possible to conduct a military operation there quite quickly. And you can also use the territory of another country, for example, Belarus, and tell everyone that it is not the Kremlin that is waging war, but Minsk. By the way, the main attack on Kyiv in February 2022 was from the territory of Belarus, so an attack from there is also possible. And in order for no one to be accused of aggression, they will invent some better case, as the fascists did with the Gleiwitz incident. Fortunately now, there are many ways to do it, and don't even need to shoot. Suffice it to say about the cyber attack. And you know, every day the probability that Putin will attack another country only increases. After all, he doesn't have clear victories in Ukraine, and the rather slow reaction of the Western world to aggression provokes dictators to new blows. They did not react to Georgia in 2008 and received the annexation of Crimea and Donbas. They did not react to the capture of those territories. They received a full-scale invasion in 2022. The reaction currently being shown in Europe and the United States is provoking Putin to new aggressions, and in order to prepare, he may even agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. Only on the current lines, and during the break restore the artillery, armored and missile reserves for a new strike. And if the Ukrainians hadn't started to defend their country like this, then perhaps an attack on the NATO countries would have already taken place, because the Russian people want new wars. Putin's support in the last election proves this once again. That seems to be it for tonight and for the week. It was Pavel Stermak in UATV, breaking the hard truths to easy terms for the whole free world, directly from Ukraine as usual. We like you, and we hope that the feeling is at least somewhat mutual. Like us in return, subscribe and share. Help us to promote Ukrainian voice worldwide. Stay safe and tuned for more right already on tomorrow.